Hi.
Hello everyone. We were in Revelation chapter 14. We finished 1 to 5, the second reference to the 144,000 who were seen here, as opposed to chapter 7 where their number is heard and their tribal affiliation is itemized. Mm-hmm. And they're protected by the angels from the results of the tribulation upon the rest of the world. Mm. But here they are seen. So we read verse 1 where they are seen with the Lamb on Mount Zion, and we discussed the significance of the city Zion. Is this heavenly Zion or earthly? And Christians are divided over that. Mm. But it connects to the next segment. So we want to read verses 6 to 13 where we get more clues as to what's going on in this same sequence of events in Revelation. We're in the seventh trumpet, and then we begin in verse 6.
And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, and he had everlasting good news to declare as glad tidings to those who dwell on the earth, and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people, saying in a loud voice, Fear God, and give him glory, because the hour of the judgment by him has arrived. And so worship the one who made the heaven and the earth, the sea and the fountains of waters. And another, a second angel, followed, saying, She has fallen, Babylon the Great has fallen, she who made all the nations drink of the wine of the anger of her fornication. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying in a loud voice, If anyone worships the wild beast and its image, and receives a mark on his forehead or upon his hand, he will also drink of the wine of the anger of God, that is poured out undiluted into the cup of his wrath. And he shall be tormented with fire and sulfur in the sight of the holy angels and in the sight of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and day and night they have no rest, those who worship the wild beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here is where it means endurance for the holy ones, and those who observe the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice out of heaven say, Write, happy are the dead who die in union with the Lord from this time onward. Yes, says the Spirit, let them rest from their labors, for the things they did go right with them.
First thing we want to observe against the time, then I saw another angel, but especially verse 7, fear God and give him glory because the hour of his judgment has come. So we're in the seventh trumpet, 7 bowls are to come, but the usual way of dealing with the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and then the 7 bowls is not to see them as consecutive judgments, but rather kind of recapitulation of the same judgments looked at from a different angle. So when it says the hour of his judgment has come, and then it links it to, for instance, in verse 11, the worshippers of the beast we've already situated as being in the very end of this sequence of events. The Watchtower, I'm not alone in this aspect, wants to make the beast and the image of the beast and the 2 horned beasts, 3 different beasts as it were, or at least looking to be 3 different beasts. The one representing world empire, that is political empires, one representing the Anglo-American world power, and the other representing the United Nations. So in one aspect they want to make it about now, the United Nations, the League of Nations before that. The other aspect they want to make it about a 2-horned beast that's been around already for at least 400 or 500 years. And in another aspect they want to make the beast represent all political power going back thousands of years. So again, the confusion about the time, but in Revelation we're dealing with a specific section of the Great Tribulation here, the latter section of the Great Tribulation, which most Christians think of as not being an indefinite period of time, but lasting 3.5 or 7 years. So the very end, the hour of judgment in verse 7. And that is also connected to the fact that you have in verse 13, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. So this contrasts with the fifth seal back in chapter 6, where you have, after the four horsemen come out, the dead are heard and seen under the altar, crying out, how long, Lord? And here seems to be the answer. Not very long. The dead who die in the Lord from now on, their labors and their deeds follow them. In other words, they get their reward right away. So we're at the very end. Whereas when you're in the Jehovah's Witnesses, when you hear fallen is Babylon, what date do you attach that to if you're a trained Jehovah's Witness?
In the 1919, is it?
Yeah.
I think Babylon fell.
And you link the fall of Babylon in 1919 to verse 13. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from henceforth. You say that that's when the resurrection of the 144,000, those that have been faithful over time, the spiritual Israel in your imagination. You say that happened back then when Babylon fell, 100 years ago. Whereas in the Revelation, these things are right at the end of the tribulation period.
Of time here, yeah.
And so is the endurance mentioned in verse 12, the endurance of the saints who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. Whereas the witnesses are, I think, in an ambiguous situation now in their application of this, because I'm not sure whether they have changed their interpretation. It used to be that God would intervene during the Great Tribulation, and that Armageddon was just a judgment of the world. That would happen, but Jehovah's Witnesses would be preserved through it.
Yeah.
Here it's a call to obedience, so I think it's worth commenting that hundreds of millions of Christians right now
also
believe they will be exempt from this.
Yeah. So I think when we'll link, I guess, to Gorman's discussion of Revelation, because he talks about that being one of the themes of Revelation, is that it's written to encourage Christians to be faithful, to have endurance.
During this most difficult period.
Yeah, during a very difficult time.
The presence of the beast and the whore on the earth at the same time. The whore falls here, we notice. Babylon the Great, who made all the nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. She falls. Now, of course, if you're a witness, you may not be aware that your interpretation of even what Babylon is has changed over time. And that now Babylon is just assumed to be the world empire, false religion. But we won't get into that till we get to chapter 17 and 18 in one of the coming videos in any detail. But it's worth noting here what this book, which I've talked about before, William Beterwolf's Second Coming Bible, today it's called, more often it's reprinted as the Millennium Bible. But Beterwolf, 100 years ago, brings together the consensus of opinion on every aspect of the Second Coming, all the verses in the Bible that refer to the Second Coming. And I'd just like to read you what he says about Babylon the Great here in this Revelation 14 text. He says, the name of the Old Testament God opposed secular power, proud, haughty, insolent, oppressive. So the consensus of Christians up until the modern times was that Babylon the Great was a secular power. Then he talks about the various interpretations within Christendom. The preterists, that is those who believe in the first century being the fulfillment of most of Revelation. The preterists understand this Babylon to be pagan Rome. The historical interpreters, those who believe Revelation covers all of history up until the Second Coming, the historical interpreters refer it chiefly to papal Rome, that is, papacy. And I think in Russell's day, that seemed to be the majority interpretation. The futurists, that is the premillennialists and especially the dispensational premillennialists, refer it, of course, to the chief city of the anti-Christian world power of the last days, the capital of Antichrist, some maintaining it to be the Rome of the future, while others refer to it as Jerusalem, ruled over during the time by Antichrist. So Beterwolf here is linking that interpretation to the Daniel mention that we put at the end of the last video, that there seems to be a direct parallel between this segment of Revelation and Daniel 11:12, where the king of the north, or Antichrist, is seen setting up his tents between the Great Sea and the Holy Mountain.
I'm thinking while you're saying all these different positions people have about what it could be, to me it just highlights the danger of trying to interpret this book. Because, for each of these individual groups, it makes some sense. They come to this conclusion based on certain factors. But because there's so many different ones, to me, it makes me think, when we studied prophecy, when we were leaving the witnesses, more about prophecies that have been fulfilled, when we studied it, you'd look at these prophecies and be amazed at how accurately they were fulfilled. But if you lived prior to them, I don't think you would ever have come up with the scenario that actually happened. Because it just doesn't work that way. It's like when you plan things. They don't work exactly the way you think they're going to work.
Mm.
So there's a danger, I think, in
being dogmatic.
Yes, yeah. You can, be fascinated by this and think of different scenarios, but I wouldn't fix on any of them too tightly.
Yes.
Because hindsight makes you see things that you just couldn't see ahead of time.
Right. There's something like 300 prophecies of Messiah's coming, but if you tried to make sense of it in advance,
yeah, you wouldn't have.
You wouldn't have been able to do it. As you clearly see in the Gospels, the disciples can't make head nor tail of Messianic prophecy. They're jumbling it all together.
Yeah.
So as some have said, that the Bible is not a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not prophecy can be treated like a jigsaw puzzle.
There's factors you're unaware of, like two comings. Like, who would have figured that out?
Well, that's why I'm saying that I think the best way to interpret any of this is to see the sequence of events and to realize that these things are happening at the very end.
Yeah.
You can't be arbitrary about that. So Biederwolf, in summarizing the teaching about Babylon here, he says, Babylon is here the type of the world power that persecutes the Church of God. Notice he never links it, and he says the other guys never link it explicitly to religion. Well, of course, religion plays a part in every empire.
Yeah.
But that's not the dominant aspect of it here. It's the secular or power aspect that dominates the picture. And I think we'll see that more plainly even still when we get to chapter 17 and 18. But we want to read verses 14 to 19 to...
Or 20, right?
14 to 20, rather, to conclude the picture here in chapter 14. The connection between the 144,000, Zion, Babylon, and now the harvest of the earth.
And I saw and look a white cloud, and upon the cloud someone seated like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel emerged from the temple sanctuary, crying with a loud voice to the one seated on the cloud, "Put your sickle in and reap, because the hour has come to reap, for the harvest of the earth is thoroughly ripe." And the one seated on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And still another angel emerged from the temple sanctuary, that is in the heaven, he too having a sharp sickle. And still another angel emerged from the altar, and he had authority over the fire. And he called out with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, saying, "Put your sharp sickle in, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, because its grapes have become ripe." And the angel thrust his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and he hurled it into the great winepress of the anger of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and the blood came out of the winepress, as high up as the bridle of the horses, for a distance of 1,600 furlongs.
Who is seen in verse 14?
Someone like a son of man.
Because in the previous verses we've seen, I saw another angel,
Yeah.
and another angel, and another angel.
Yeah.
But this one is separated from the others.
Mm-hmm.
Someone like a son of man, and that's got to be significant.
Yeah, because that's been applied to Jesus in Daniel 7 as well, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you believe as a witness to us that when Christ returned, he became an angel, Michael again, doesn't this kind of confuse the matter? Like,
Yeah.
why does it make him distinct and call him like a son of man?
And when Christ
if
talks
he's an
about
angel?
when Christ talks about his coming again, he habitually refers to himself as the Son of Man, which seems to be a direct reference to the passage you just mentioned, Daniel 7, where someone like a son of man comes up
Yeah.
to the throne of the Almighty, the Ancient of Days as he's called in Daniel 7, and is given sovereignty. He's
Yeah.
given the kingdom. This famous passage connected to Daniel 2, where the kingdoms of the world become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. We'll deal with Revelation 11 later.
And when we
where that
were
comes
looking
from.
at it, you were talking about there's two sickles here. There's the sickle that's in the hand of the Son of Man, and then an angel also has a sickle.
Yeah. And in addition to the sickle given to him in his hand, he has a golden crown on his head. So that connects again to Daniel 7, where he's given universal sovereignty. And he's on a cloud. So there you have three connections to Daniel 7. Son of Man, cloud, and crown.
Right.
Sovereignty.
Yep.
Now, as you just said, though, is there one harvest here that is a harvest of judgment only? Because some interpreters take this to be two harvests. One sickle is for the harvest of the saints, as it were, and the other harvest, which seems to be the harvesters in the rest of it, from 17 onwards, seem to be the angels again,
But for judgment.
for judgment explicitly in the last verses, right?
Right.
Some interpret the first verses, though, as the harvest of the saints. I'm not decided. I don't think we need to be dogmatic about it. Just to observe that, well, all of this is happening more or less at the same time during the seventh trumpet. And when you get to the harvest being fully ripe, well, I'm connecting that with Matthew 13, the parable of the wheat and the tares. But before that, the parable of the wheat,
Right.
where you have Christ, that is the master of the harvest, actually having to say to his servants, wait until the harvest,
There'll be two growing together.
and we will see. You'll be able to see the difference. So again, putting it to the very end, and the Watchtower, what does it do with this? Well, it shoves the harvest to 1914. Before that, they taught that the harvest was from 1874 onward. So they keep moving the date of the harvest, but in the Revelation, the harvest is the very last. The separation of the saints from the sinners, and the second coming. So by the time you get to the judgment, this is, I think, one of the two most gory scenes of Armageddon. Although Armageddon's not named here, there is a geographical link to it, because you get to verse 20 and you hear about a winepress being trodden outside the city, which is not named. But what cities are here?
Well, the two cities that we've talked about are Babylon the Great and Zion, right?
Yeah, in this chapter we've got Babylon mentioned in verse 8, but we've got Zion mentioned in verse 1.
Right.
And this directly connects to Joel chapter 3, where we're told that when Yahweh comes to judge the earth and to redeem his people, the judgment will take place on earth in the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is actually a literal valley
Outside the city.
outside Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So some want to take this very literally and say the city here is Mount Zion, or Jerusalem, as most of us would call it. And there's another geographical reference potentially in verse 20, which we've dealt with in another video.
The distance of 1,600 furlongs is an approximate length of the city, Jerusalem,
The Promised Land.
the Promised Land. Oh yeah, okay.
The city's only a couple of miles,
Right.
even
The
today is
Promised
only
Land.
a few miles in circumference, but in those days it was a smallish city, but the Promised Land's dimensions were known. Somewhere between 150 and 200 miles, depending on how you count miles.
Yeah.
So some want to take this very literally, and we've done videos on this before. Well, what was Christendom saying at the very same time the Watchtower was doing its
Yeah,
flip-flop
Yeah,
during the World War I period, when they published the finished mystery? The
yeah. And
mystery's over, and
yeah.
what does the 1600
so
refer to?
now they wouldn't make the application they did then. We found it funny, the application. But we talked about this this thing about the Watchtower always wanting it to be about them. And so because they were in New York, they make this whole crazy figuring of, landmarks in New York City, because that's where they are.
Yes, linking to their work in New York City. So it was literal. 1600 furlongs
Yeah.
was approximately 200 miles measured in a certain, according to certain streets.
Yeah.
It's
Where the
explicit.
headquarters were and where the literature came in and like just crazy stuff.
So we'll link you to that for sure.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it needs to be said that now they've done a flip flop and they've said that no, the 1600 is a symbolic number. Well, why is it symbolic? Well, because 4 is symbolic in the Bible, and 4, this is 4 times 4 times 10 times 10. They want to make all the numbers have symbolic value.
And because they moved out of New York.
Well, I think it came before that.
Yeah, I know.
But in becoming a worldwide cult,
Yeah.
of course, they couldn't tie all of the prophetic scenario to New York City anymore. So you could say they're being very arbitrary, as usual,
Humpty Dumpty.
according to their historical understanding of themselves.
Yeah.
Christendom is divided on this. So 1600, a lot of the interpreters take it as a symbolic number because of 4 and 10. But a lot of the interpreters say, no, it seems to have more of a geographical reference here, especially because it's connected to the city. So again, let's not be dogmatic about what it does mean, but let's just point out the problems in this. There's even a bigger problem, which is we're dealing here with an apocalyptic book.
Yeah.
And that
Full of symbols and
itself creates a problem because it's all in pictures.
yeah. Yeah.
So when something's
caution.
in pictures, it's like watching movies and saying, what's the official interpretation?
Yeah. Yeah. We should be far more cautious than most of us are.
Yeah. So in the next segment, we will deal with Armageddon explicitly and what the Watchtower does with their single proof text for Armageddon in this book of Revelation.
Okay.